Tim Abraham. Tim is with the Mid-York Bee Association. And Tim, good morning. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good. We were had a little leakage problem in our ceiling. Had to pull out the sheetrock, pull it all down. And as we were pulling away, we exposed, well, first we saw a little bee's nest. And then we saw another one. And then as we pulled away, we found this enormous, larger than a watermelon, huge bee's nest inside between the rafters. We believe it's a hornet's nest. Looks like maybe the previous homeowners had used maybe an exterminator, because there were just hundreds and hundreds of bees that were lying on top of the sheetrock dead. Common occurrence? Question mark?
Yeah, it's a pretty common occurrence. They'll go wherever they can find an open cavity that gets them out of the elements.
So how do you handle that? Do you, because you would like to know, is this a honeybees you would handle differently than wasps or hornets or something like that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I get calls from homeowners all the time. Can you come remove these honeybees? I don't want to kill them, which is a great way to think about it. But most of the time when I get there, it's either Yellowjackets or hornets.
Yeah.
And just like, the paper nests that we see a lot of times hanging from trees or underneath eaves and things like that, it turns out to be more of a nuisance insect than something that can help us. So I tell people to just, at that point, if it's Yellowjackets or wasps, just to call the exterminators.
So tell me, I remember a while back, this was in Mid-York. You're located where, by the way?
Well, we meet up at the Cornell Cooperative Extension.
Okay, all right.
So yeah, we have our meetings up there.
So you'd be familiar with Cedarville, New York.
Sure.
Which is in, I believe it's still in Herkimer County there. So I don't know, this might have been 10, 15 years ago, might have been longer than that. There was a tree right on the corner. It was a big, let's call it a big maple tree. And a storm came through, the tree comes down, and there were just clouds of honeybees flying all over the place. Within the trunk of that tree, they had created the largest honeybee's nest I'd ever seen. It was enormous. And is that common, burrowing in trees? Or do honeybees use the paper nest that you see on, I don't know, Winnie the Pooh reaching into a paper nest or something?
Yeah, they actually, the tree cavity is actually the most natural place where they're going to have a nest.
Okay.
Like I said, it's anywhere that they can find an open cavity. What we do now with managing them in hives is actually relatively unnatural for them. They would rather live in trees and open spaces, open cavities like that. But obviously, it's much easier for us to get at what we're getting at. If we have them in a hive we can manage.
And I know that for that situation, they brought in a beekeeper who lured them out of there, and that's a process of its own, right? That's quite
absolutely
in-depth process.
Yeah, I've done that a couple of times, and it takes weeks really to get them out. If you're cutting the tree down, it's a whole lot easier. But if you're just trying to trap them out of a tree, I had a tree that was on a golf course right next to a tee box, and that's obviously not a good place for lots of bees to be flying in and out.
Yep.
So it took weeks to get them all out of there. And I've got another friend that's got a hive that's a colony that's in a tree, probably about 30 feet up, and that one's just going to stay there because just getting at it is near impossible.
So I had, I'm just going to give you all my life experience stories with bees because I have a lot of questions here. And if anybody has any questions, this is Tim Abraham with Mid-York Bee Association. If you have any questions, and maybe from your own property or just questions in general, 315-736-0186. This I find to be very, very interesting. Let's take you to our previous home where we had a lot of pine trees. The sap falls down onto a walkway that we had, and we just had, I don't know, it might have been 20 or 30 bees that were constantly just going around the patio. It looked like they were looking at the water or any of the sap, and they were trying to pick that up. Would that be a honeybee, or could that? They didn't attack us. You'd walk by. They just continue to do what they were doing.
Yeah, and like most bees, they're not gonna, they're doing their job, so they'd rather do that than mess around with us.
Yeah.
It's just when we get in the way, that's usually when it becomes a problem. So, but they're collecting any substances like that tree sap that they can use to essentially line the inside of their hive or their space.
And it was interesting. I mean, it was to watch this. You're seeing them fly in. They were doing their thing, and they're flying out, and they're all going basically the same trail through the air. It's so interesting to watch how these insects have a mission and they have a job to do. It's really quite incredible.
Yeah, when they get back to the hive, they actually do a what's called a waggle dance, and bees will indicate by the way that they move around in the directions that they go inside the hive. They'll indicate to the other bees where a source of whatever they're trying to find, whether it's nectar, or whether it's that sap or whatever, or water or anything like that. That'll give them direction, and then away they go. The bees, that's their job, and they will follow and collect that stuff.
So last year in our backyard on grass, you'd walk in and there'd be bees, walk across the lawn, there'd be bees flying up all over the place. And holes that had little mounds, hundreds and hundreds of holes all throughout the
you step on
grass.
that thing, good luck.
No, we would walk across it, not be stung. The
Really?
bees would kind of fly away. What are we talking about there? What kind of bees are those?
There are varieties of bees, ground nesting bees.
Yeah.
That probably is what they are. More often than not, we see, especially in the fall, I see Yellowjackets that are in the ground. In my yard, I've got a bunch of chipmunk burrows, and the Yellowjackets always seem to try to find a place for the winter, and they get down in there. So, mowing lawn and running around the backyard with shoes off is sometimes a little perilous.
Can be a little bit. This was the weirdest thing. These bees had no interest in singing anybody. It was, and by the middle of the summer, they were gone. The holes were still there, but
Bill's
there were no bees.
the bee whisperer.
I'm
so
the bee
that's
whisperer.
part of it,
Yeah,
but,
it might be it.
Well, twice in the last in as many years, because I've stepped on a nest or around a nest, I've gotten stung, and it hurts.
And Tim, you really mowing lawns. You hear these stories, especially if somebody's allergic to bees. You can ride over a nest, a nasty nest, and it can be, it can be fatal.
Absolutely, and again, those usually are the Yellowjackets or a different type of insect. They're more of the wasp or hornet family. But they hurt. There's no question, and because they can sting repeatedly, unlike a honeybee, they'll get you a couple of times each if they want to.
Tim, we have Debbie in Clark Mills who has a question. Debbie, you're on with Tim Abraham from the Mid-New York Beekeeper Association.
Oh, hi. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
I had a problem last year with Carpenter bees.
Carpenter bees?
Mm-hmm.
What do you know about them, Tim?
Yeah, Carpenter bees are. I've got a couple of little holes in the side of my house as well. They're a solitary bee, but they'll chew through siding. They'll chew through any place that they want to go. Again, to try and find a cavity to call home and reproduce. So they're not really trying to do anything bad to us, but they are certainly more of a nuisance because they do damage the wood.
Debbie, did it get into did it get into your rafters? And
they made their way into the front door around the casing, up underneath where they were. I probably didn't caulk it underneath, and then they made their way in, and they were just millions of them just flying in and out, and finally they almost got into the front door of the house there.
So how did you handle that? What'd you do?
Well, I only handled it myself by talking to someone that used to be in that field, and he told me about the Carpenter bees, and I got something at Agway, but I don't think I solved the problem. I think they're going to come back because the male is the dominant to watch for the females to get up in there and work.
All right, what do you say to that, Tim?
Yeah, what happens a lot of times, too, is when they get into a space, they leave their pheromone, they leave their scent, and there's their nesting materials. So that's very powerful to another bee that'll attract them back. So a lot of times, if I cut bees out of the side of a house or any structure, we got to make sure that we scrape as much out of there as we can and really just make it clean so that they're not coming back. And like Debbie said, caulking up the holes and everything else to really try and
all right, interesting.
Future ones away.
All right, Debbie, thanks for that story. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you very much.
I have
good luck with that, Debbie.
In our house, where in the ceiling, which we've not filled back in yet, we haven't completed to put sheetrock back up yet. There's still remnants of the nest. You say so we should scrape that down completely and kind of wash it off?
Yeah, that's the best thing to do. You just try to eliminate as much of that as you can,
right.
And then just making sure that wherever that wherever that entrance was that they found, making sure that that's sealed up really well.
Okay. Finally, I want to. There's a story. There, obviously, we have a problem with honeybees in not just the country but in the world, where the population is declining for many different reasons. It's to the point where there is bootleg. I don't want to call it bootleg, but fake honey that's being sold. Is that true?
Yeah, unfortunately it is. I just recently watched, the Netflix series Rotten that had a segment on that, and unfortunately it is true. They highlighted one of the stories that I remembered, anyways, reading in the paper about multi-million-dollar, like hundreds of millions of dollars worth of imported honey that was essentially tainted. And there was a firm in Chicago that people went to jail for because they were doing this illegally. So, yeah, unfortunately, it's a bad thing. The demand that the United States and the world is for the honey certainly is less than what the output is even in the United States.
Paul has a quick question. Paul, you're on with Tim Abraham, Mid-York Beekeeper Association. Go ahead.
Hi, Tim. I was wondering how you treat for Varroa mites.
Well, there are several different ways that we treat for Varroa mites. A Varroa mite is a parasite that now is really starting to impact the bee health and is part of the decline of bees in general. They weaken the bee's immune system, and then bees eventually die. So there are several different ways that you can treat for Varroa mites. There are chemicals out there, but as people explain, it's hard to kill a bug on top of a bug without killing the first bug. So it's difficult at best. I treat when I need to, depending on I check for the levels of my mites in my hive, but I'll treat with a over-the-counter treatment. It's called a formic acid treatment. I also take other natural steps to try and eliminate or break the breeding cycle of the mite, so that so that I don't have to use any other substances to try and fight them.
All right. Well, that question, Paul, was over my head.
Yeah,
so
they have to be really small, those mites, because bees are small.
Paul,
they're fairly small. They're hard to see. And when you take some of the bees out, you coat them with powdered sugar and toss them around a little bit, but the mites will actually come off. And I was more interested in the natural ways. I know they have like mite away strips and different chemical strips, besides applying the acid to the bottom of the hive. And have you used any of the mite away strips?
I have. Yeah, that's probably my my tool of choice, I guess, if I have to do it. Because that is the formic acid that's in that is a natural occurring element, so it's not something that's a synthetic, occurring thing, and it's a little bit healthier for the bees.
Well, this all started with a wasp's, I believe, a wasp's nest in my house. It was gigantic. So, Paul, we appreciate the question there. Thanks so much.
All right, have a
good luck
day,
with your mites.
And Tim, if obviously the message here is probably a good idea to there are many markets and places you can go to, stands all over the Utica Public Market, the Clinton, all over the place. Local honey is the key. Absolutely. That's the big thing is buy local. There are
tons of beekeepers. I mean, we've got a great organization, and there are people all over central New York that are selling local honey that's only produced right here.
Right.
And that helps with, like, local allergens, too. You use local honey.
That's been challenged.
Right?
Is that true? Right? Is that true, Tim?
That has been challenged, and they're you get some people. It's like anything else. You get some people that swear by it, and then you get others that say there's not so much. So if it works for you, go for it.
I believe vodka keeps me healthy.
Blueberries,
whatever works for you.
Just drop a blueberry in there, and all of a sudden it's a health drink. Okay, Tim, how do they reach out to Mid-York Beekeeper Association? By the way.
Easiest thing is the website. It's midyorkbeekeepers.weebly.com.
Right.
You can go on there and look around.
Very interesting. Who would think that bees would be a big topic? Tim would, but I guess we never thunk it. But it is true. And as we come up on springtime, it's nesting season, so it's something to keep an eye on. Tim Abraham, thanks so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Glad to be here.
All right.